She thought it was just a dusty locker. Foreclosed. Forgotten. Bought on a hunch for less than a new tire. But what she found inside wasn't junk. It was sealed, heavy, and wrapped like the world was never supposed to see it again. And the moment she laid eyes on it, something in her life and in history cracked wide open. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if stories like this pull at something deep in you, the kind of stories that mix legacy, mystery, and machines, hit that subscribe button. Because tomorrow's story, it's even wilder than this one. The sun hit the storage lot like a blowtorch. Concrete baked, sweat clung, and the auctioneer's voice cracked with boredom. Most of the crowd had already left. The final locker of the day looked like nothing Unit 217, dented on the bottom corner, rust nibbling the hinges, and a padlock that looked like it hadn't been touched since 1998. Riley Monroe shifted her weight, thumb hooked in her tool belt, and watched as the auctioneer raised his hand. Last call, anyone? Going once. She raised hers. Not high, just enough. Sold $120 to the young lady with the boots, he said, barely looking her way. Riley walked toward the locker like it might bite. She didn't know why she bid. Instinct, maybe. Or stubbornness. She hadn't driven all this way to go home empty-handed. She ran a tiny mechanic's shop on the edge of the industrial district, the kind of place people brought things when no one else could fix them. And lately, fixing things felt like the only part of her life she could control. The bolt cutter sliced the lock in two. The door groaned open on sticky hinges. At first, she thought it was just shadows. Then her eyes adjusted. There was something large, wrapped tightly in green military-grade canvas, bungee strapped at 5 points. It took up most of the space, shoved in like it had been hidden in a panic. Alongside it were 2 gray metal crates, both stenciled with long serial codes and faded orange warning stripes. She stepped back, blinked, took a breath. This wasn't an old couch or boxes of someone's junk. This looked like equipment. Government, maybe. Or aviation? No, too smooth, too rounded. There were metal ports, a thick cylindrical body, and faint lettering peeking through the canvas folds. Her heart started to pound. She glanced around the lot. Empty. No one had seen it. Her boots echoed as she stepped inside the unit. The air was hot, dead. She crouched and ran her fingers over the crate. The label read, "Property of AFMC. Do not tamper. Air Force Materiel Command." Riley stood up fast. This was supposed to be a foreclosed civilian unit. The auction paperwork said the locker belonged to a man named James Tucker, no military background listed. Just a name, a balance due, and a box nobody wanted. She stared at the tarp-covered shape. Whatever was under there, someone once went to a lot of trouble to hide it. And now, somehow, it was hers. The metal was cool, even in the heat. She ran her hand across the canvas, felt something firm, curved, aerodynamic. Then her fingers found something else, a metal handle, fixed, industrial, and right beside it, stitched into the edge of the tarp in barely visible thread. Seraphim-X, evac vehicle, D.O. 93.9. Her stomach dropped. This wasn't just equipment. This was something no civilian should own, and she had no idea what to do with it. She didn't sleep that night. Not really. Just stared at the ceiling, boots still on, her brain running laps around a single question. What the hell had she just bought? By morning, she'd hitched her trailer and headed back to the lot before anyone else could show up. The storage facility didn't care she'd paid in cash, signed the waiver. As far as they were concerned, everything in that locker was hers. All of it. Even if it looked like something salvaged from a classified crash site. The sun beat down as she slid open the locker again. The thing sat exactly where she'd left it. Still wrapped. Still humming with that eerie, weightless tension. Riley approached it slowly, like a mechanic approaching a car with a history of biting back. She reached out and tugged the tarp gently at first, then with more force. The green canvas fell in a heavy wave, and there it was. A smooth, elliptical pod matte metal with seams running like veins across its surface. About the size of a small car. Jet black in some places, brushed steel in others. A thick, circular door sat recessed on one end, like the hatch of a submarine. Around the edge, faint markings, stenciled in old paint, most of them worn unreadable. But one symbol stood out. A faded triangle surrounding a winged key. Not civilian. Not commercial. Riley stepped back, heart drumming in her ears. She circled the pod. On its underside, small fixed fins, vents, something like retro thrusters. It wasn't just for storage or transport. Whatever this was, it was meant to move. And yet, it had no wheels. No engine block she could see. Just sleek, unbroken curves and a weight that felt impossible. She moved to one of the crates beside it. Flipped the latches. The lid gave with a click. Inside, foam padding, a tangled harness, an oxygen tank, and buried beneath it a silver tablet the size of a clipboard. No screen, just a sealed panel, a recessed slot, and a small brass label that read, Connection Interface. Unit 3, B. She had no idea what it meant. She opened the second crate. Wires. Manuals. A suit folded tight in vacuum seal plastic, dark gray, military cut, but lined with padding along the spine. A name patch. Lieutenant Monroe. Gr. Riley froze. Her breath caught in her throat. Monroe. She touched the patch like it might disappear. Her father's last name. Her last name, and not one she expected to find, sewn into something that looked like it belonged on a space shuttle. She backed away from the pod slowly. Suddenly it wasn't just strange. It was personal. She pulled out her phone, found a contact buried near the bottom. Her uncle, Glenn Monroe, retired Air Force, a man who rarely picked up. But this time, on the second ring, he did. Riley, he said, voice groggy. She didn't waste time. Uncle Glenn, I found something. In a storage locker. You were Air Force. Have you ever heard of something called Seraphim-X? Silence. For too long. Then, just 3 words. Low and sharp. Where are you? By the time Glenn pulled into the lot, Riley had already moved the crates and pod onto her trailer. The thing took up the entire bed, strapped down with reinforced chains she'd borrowed from a tow truck friend. She hadn't even blinked at the weight it was, as if adrenaline made her forget physics, or fear. His truck rolled to a stop beside hers. Old F-150 still had his unit's faded decal on the back window. He stepped out slow, one hand shading his brow, the other already shaking slightly, not from age, but recognition. What the hell? He whispered, walking straight toward the trailer. Riley didn't say anything. She just let him look. He moved around the pod, eyes scanning every panel, like a man reading a ghost story he once helped write. When he spotted the triangle with key insignia, he flinched. That wasn't subtle. It was instinct. This was black budget, he muttered. Deep black. I haven't seen this logo in over 20 years. You know what it is? She asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he crouched beside the crate she'd pried open earlier, brushing dust off the label like it was sacred. Then, he froze. You opened this? Yeah. He looked up slowly. Did you touch anything else? Riley raised an eyebrow. I didn't lick it, Glenn. I opened a box. He exhaled through his nose and pulled a pair of gloves from his back pocket. Old habits. Then he dug into the crate and lifted out the silver device Riley had found, the one she thought might be a tablet. This isn't a tablet, he said. It's an interface node. This plugs directly into the command deck of the Seraphim unit. So, it is a vehicle. He gave a slow nod. Kind of. It was meant to be a rapid evac pod for top-tier personnel, classified continuation of government protocol. The idea was to get someone important out of a collapse zone in under 3 minutes. Vertical launch, autopilot trajectory, mid-air pickup or satellite-guided glide. Basically, a lifeboat from a sinking world. And why was it in a storage unit? He didn't have an answer for that. Instead, he stood and looked her in the eye. This was mothballed before you were born. I remember hearing whispers one of the prototypes vanished during final transport. They called it a paperwork error, but everyone knew better. Riley crossed her arms. You think this is it? He nodded. If that serial code's real, then yeah, this is Seraphim-X, the missing pod. But why was there a flight suit with our name on it? Glenn looked away. I don't know. She didn't believe him. Not entirely. He was rattled. That much was clear. But before she could press, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a penlight. Help me check something. Together, they moved to the hatch. Glenn found a panel near the edge, brushed dust off a recessed keypad. He hesitated, then punched in a 6-digit code like his fingers remembered without thinking. The panel clicked. A green light blinked once, and then, slowly, the hatch began to hiss open. The hatch opened like it remembered how. No grinding, no resistance, just a smooth, pressurized hiss and the soft glow of internal lighting flickering to life. Riley stepped back instinctively. Glenn didn't. He leaned in, scanning the interior like a man tracing old scars with his eyes. Inside was a cockpit. Tight, but not cramped. Every surface was molded to the shape of a single occupant seat, angled back, straps coiled and ready, control surfaces built into the walls. But this wasn't like any cockpit Riley had seen before. There was no steering wheel, no flight stick, no pedals. Just a curved console with a thin horizontal screen, a biometric reader, and another identical interface slot to the tablet Glenn now held in his hands. He didn't move, just stared. Uncle Glenn, Riley said, more quietly this time. You've seen this before. I was at Wright Pat when they ran the tests, he finally said, voice like gravel. Back in '97. The prototype ran on a modular AI flight program, the kind we weren't even supposed to have back then. But that wasn't the crazy part. The crazy part was who they chose to train as the pilot. He turned to her slowly. Your father. Riley's knees went weak. She sat down hard on the edge of the trailer. Her father, Gordon Monroe, had died when she was 16. A car accident on his way home from a job site. He'd always been quiet about his military service, said it was short, routine, nothing classified. Just logistics, maintenance, a few contracts here and there. But she'd always felt there was more to the story. And now she was staring at a vehicle designed to escape the end of the world, and a flight suit with his name stitched into the chest. I thought he was a mechanic, she said. He was, Glenn said. But he was also a test subject. One of the few who passed the compatibility trials. His nervous system synced with the pod's control suite better than anyone else. He could fly it, with thought alone. Riley blinked. What happened? They pulled the plug. Too risky, too expensive. Cold War was over. Everyone thought we'd dodged the bullet, so they buried the project, scrapped most of the tech, sealed the rest. But then, a few months later, this pod went missing. And you think he took it? And Glenn nodded. Or maybe someone sent it to him. Either way, he never said a word. Riley's throat tightened. Her father had taught her everything she knew about machines. They used to rebuild carburetors in their driveway, while other kids played baseball. But never once had he mentioned this. Not the Seraphim project. Not Wright Pat. Not any of it. Glenn stepped back from the pod. There's one way to know for sure. He held out the tablet. Plug this in. Riley stared at the slot, at the light still blinking on the console inside. Something about this felt final, like the moment before a car engine turns over the breath before ignition. She took the tablet and slid it in. The tablet clicked into place with a muted chime. Lights along the console pulsed amber, then white. Riley stepped back, startled, as the entire interior came alive. The screen lit up with diagnostics lines of green code cascading faster than she could read. Diagrams loading one by one, showing structural integrity, fuel systems, Biometric readiness. Then the voice came. Pilot interface detected. Initiating legacy sync protocol. Welcome, Lieutenant Monroe. Riley froze. Glenn's jaw tightened, but he didn't look surprised. She was shaking. That voice just said Lieutenant Monroe, she whispered. I heard it, Glenn replied, low. But it's me, standing here, he nodded. That's what legacy sync means. It's keyed to the Monroe DNA line. You're saying it thinks I'm him? I'm saying, Glenn said carefully, it thinks you're his, which you are. The cockpit lights shifted to soft blue. The pod seemed to breathe, the system settling into standby like a dog recognizing its owner. Riley climbed the trailer ramp and stepped into the hatch. The interior was cool, metallic, but not sterile. It smelled faintly of rubber and oil familiar. The seat fit her body too perfectly, as if her father had left it adjusted for her, not him. The console now displayed a prompt. Mission data encrypted. Biometric confirmation required. A small pad blinked beside her hand. Glenn, she said. If I put my hand on that, what happens? He shrugged. You either wake up more questions, or you unlock everything. She hesitated. Then, slowly, she placed her palm on the pad. It scanned in a single second. A soft chime. Then the screen changed again. A new folder appeared. G. Monroe Mission Logs. Final transfer. Her breath caught. She tapped the first log. It was a video. Static cleared, revealing a dim-lit face, her father, younger than she'd ever seen him. Late 20 seconds. Same jawline. Same eyes. He was inside this very pod. If you're seeing this, he said softly, then the Seraphim-X is no longer in the hands of the U.S. government. And that means your family. I made sure of it. Riley's eyes burned. I had to take it. They were going to scrap it. Said it was too dangerous. Too unstable. But I knew what it was. What it could be. And if things ever went south, if the country fell apart, I wanted you to have it. Not the military. Not some suit. You. The screen blinked again. New files loaded. Coordinates. Blueprints. A map with a pin marked Echo Ridge. And below that, one final line of text. Lockbox key stored in crate 2. Contents. Journal. Field card. Activation code. She looked at Glenn. You still think he just kept this a secret for fun? He was quiet for a long moment. Then finally, he said, No. I think he was building something. Riley turned back toward the glowing cockpit. And I think he left it for me to finish. The second crate sat on her shop floor like a bomb. Riley had to force herself to approach it. After what she'd just seen in the pod, the weight of what it might contain felt heavier than steel. She knelt, undid the latches with slow, steady hands, and peeled back the lid. Inside was a fireproof satchel, faded but intact, sealed with 2 buckles. She unfastened them carefully. The smell of age hit her first paper, dust, and the faint metallic scent of old ink. A journal rested on top. Beneath it, a security badge with a yellowed plastic sleeve that read, Monroe G, Level 4, Access, Echo Ridge Site. The photo showed her father in uniform, his face a little more tired than in the video. Same jaw, same eyes. She swallowed hard. She picked up the journal. The leather was cracked, but the spine held. She opened it to the first page. To whoever finds this, if you're reading my notes, then time has finally caught up with Seraphim-X. These entries aren't for command. They're for blood. My blood. I pray that's you. Her hands shook. She flipped through slowly. The entries were dated between 1995 and 1999. Each page detailed more about the project than she'd ever imagined. Seraphim-X wasn't just a prototype, it was part of a larger system. A network of emergency evacuation vehicles spread across the country, each tied to a Cold War-era protocol codenamed the Ark. Echo Ridge was our fallback. A bunker cut into bedrock, not for soldiers, for continuity senators, Supreme Court justices, and one key pilot. And beneath that, a sketch of the pod, the same one in her garage, hand-drawn, annotated, every bolt labeled. It wasn't a government schematic. It was a love letter to the machine. Her father had studied it, worked it, cared for it. Another page. They shut it down in '99, canceled funding, said we'd never need it. Then the reports came in whispers of a mole, stolen data, a missing prototype. That was us. That was me. Riley blinked hard. He'd stolen the pod to protect it. To protect them. At the bottom of the satchel was a small velvet pouch. She opened it. Inside, a key. Not a car key, smaller, sleeker, chrome, stamped with the same insignia that had been painted on the pod's hatch. The triangle with the winged key. What do you think it opens? She asked aloud. Glenn didn't answer. He just picked up the badge. This access card, he said, turning it over. It's not just symbolic. Echo Ridge wasn't some paper bunker. I heard rumors back in the day. Half the guys thought it was a myth, but it was real. One of the few off-grid facilities that could still function. Riley stared at the key. You think it's still there? Ha, Glenn looked up. There's one way to find out. She picked up the map, folded in the back of the journal, drawn over top of an old topographical survey. Echo Ridge. She knew the area 30 minutes west. Dirt roads, hills, no cell signal. She looked at the pod. Then, the key, and said quietly, "Let's go." They left just before sunset. Riley's trailer hitched to Glenn's truck, the pod still tightly strapped down, covered again in the military canvas. They didn't talk much on the drive. There wasn't much to say. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was reverent. Like they both knew they were crossing a line between curiosity and something sacred. The directions in the journal were cryptic. No GPS coordinates, no street names, just turns, landmarks, and a phrase Riley kept repeating in her head. Follow the ridge until the trees thin out. The rock face will find you. It sounded poetic, until it wasn't. About 32 minutes in, the road narrowed into gravel. Then dirt. Then nothing at all. They had to park and walk. The air turned cool, crisp, with the scent of pine and rock. Crickets hummed like low static. The world felt too quiet. Glenn spotted it first, a sheer wall of stone rising from the earth like the spine of a buried giant. Faded spray paint marked the edge of a boulder, a faint X, worn almost invisible. Behind it, half covered in moss, was a metal panel embedded in the rock. Riley knelt. There was a card reader. Dead. No lights. No hum. But the outline was still intact. She pulled out the badge. Nothing. Try the key, Glenn whispered. She did. There was no keyhole, but when she brought it near the lower panel, a magnet inside clicked. Something shifted deep in the stone. A soft mechanical groan echoed behind the wall. Then, a hiss. Dust poured out from the edges, and the panel moved. It split down the middle, a hidden door revealing itself rusted, groaning, but still functioning. Riley's breath caught. Beyond the door, a staircase. Metal, leading down into pure black. She flicked on her flashlight. The beam revealed concrete walls, still dry. Signs of life-sealed wiring, emergency conduit. They moved slow, each step ringing in their bones. 20 steps, then 50, then 100, and finally, a room, octagonal, reinforced. Empty, except for a long console and a wall lined with old monitors and switches. A plaque above the far panel read, Echo Ridge, Continuity Site 7, EST 1963, and beneath it, something else. Carved by hand, not machine. He who prepares for the storm is never buried by it. Glenn let out a low whistle. I can't believe it's real. Riley moved to the console. Dust-covered, dead. But next to it was another key slot, this one visible. She inserted the chrome key. The panel clicked. Lights flickered across the room, old fluorescents humming back to life. Power surged into the air. A deep hum rolled beneath their feet. the kind you only hear in places meant to last centuries. And on the main screen, a simple prompt blinked. Seraphim-X System Standby Mode. Pilot identification required to begin final diagnostics. Glenn turned to her, awe written all over his face. "This was your father's last assignment," he said. Riley stepped toward the screen. "No," she whispered. "It's mine now." The hum of the room settled into a low, steady pulse, the kind of vibration you felt in your bones before you ever heard it. Old fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a ghostly glow over concrete walls that hadn't seen daylight in decades. Dust floated like snow in still air, undisturbed until now. Riley stood in front of the console, heart pounding, palms clammy. The prompt still blinked on the screen. Pilot identification required to begin final diagnostics. She glanced at Glenn. He gave a nod, silent encouragement, then stepped back. This was her moment. She reached forward and pressed her hand against the biometric scanner. The glass plate was cold, and for a moment she thought nothing would happen. But then it glowed blue, scanned her palm in a ripple of light. A quiet beep followed. Then the screen changed. Identity confirmed. Monroe, R, genetic match. Monroe, G, authority level, inherited. Glenn let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Inherited," he repeated, half to himself. But Riley was locked in. The console began to scroll data rows and rows of logs, diagnostics, launch sequences, emergency override protocols, and then came the most chilling part. A second message blinked to life. Final mission. Awaiting reinstatement. She selected the file. A loading bar appeared. Then another video. It was her father again, this time older, closer to how she remembered him before he died. He looked tired, haunted, but his voice was clear. "If you're watching this, then Seraphim-X has been reactivated. That means either the world has gone sideways, or you're the one I hoped would find this." He looked off camera, then back. His eyes were glassy. "I couldn't let them bury it." This machine was never just about evacuation. It was about memory, continuity. A lifeboat, not just for power, but for truth. "And if you found this place, then I trust you to decide what to do next." The video ended. Silence. Riley stepped back from the console. Her head was spinning. The files she'd just unlocked there were hundreds. Flight logs, AI protocol files, engineering schematics, even diplomatic lists. All tied to something the world had tried to erase. She looked over at Glenn, who hadn't moved. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "I just never thought. I mean, your dad talked about some top-secret stuff now and then. But this?" He gestured around the room. "This is Cold War mythology. We joked about places like this. Bunkers that never existed. Evac plans for presidents and generals. But this is real. He made it real." She walked to the edge of the room. Her boots echoed softly as she paced in a circle, absorbing the space, the weight of it. Then something caught her eye, a side door, slightly ajar, paint peeling at the hinges. She opened it carefully. Inside was a smaller chamber. A mechanical bay, empty except for one thing. A platform, steel, meant to hold the Seraphim-X pod, wires still connected to the wall. Old conduits ready to sync data. She turned back toward the hall. "We have to bring it here," she said quietly. "You're serious?" Glenn asked. She nodded. "This is where it was meant to go, where he meant for me to bring it." Everything he left behind points to one thing. This machine wasn't just to be hidden, it was to be finished. Glenn didn't argue. He just looked at her the way her father used to, like he believed she could fix anything. Even this. The pod was back on the trailer by nightfall. Riley and Glenn had worked in near silence. Every strap tightened with more reverence than force. They drove slowly, avoiding the main roads. She didn't want questions. She didn't want attention. Not yet. By the time they backed the trailer up to the hidden access door at Echo Ridge, the forest was black and still. Glenn handled the makeshift winch system, guiding the pod down the ramp. It wasn't designed to fit through standard doorways, but this one wasn't standard. It swallowed the machine, like a mouth, long waiting to be fed. Inside the main chamber, the pod clicked into place on the cradle. The lights flickered again. Monitors hummed back to life. The system recognized the pod instantly. Seraphim-X unit detected. Preparing sync protocol. Riley stood over it, exhausted but lit from inside. For the first time, she wasn't just following her father's breadcrumbs. She was walking in his exact footsteps. And then came the knock. 3 dull thuds on the outer bunker door. She and Glenn froze, looked at each other. No one else knew. They'd told no one. Another knock. Glenn reached under the tool bench and pulled out an old crowbar, not exactly military grade, but something. Riley moved cautiously up the stairwell toward the outer door. There was a figure silhouetted in the frame. Not moving. Just waiting. She flicked on the spotlight. The man was older. Late 52nds, maybe. Trim beard, glasses, dressed in a suit that didn't belong in a forest. He didn't flinch in the light, just looked straight at her. "Riley Monroe," he said softly. "Not a question." She didn't answer. "I'm not here to hurt you," he continued, "but I am here to talk about what you've found." Glenn stepped into the light behind her. The man raised a hand slow, palms open. "I'm not armed," he said. "But I won't blame you if you don't believe me." "Who are you?" Glenn demanded. "My name is Marcus Dalton. I used to work in defense analysis. Black budget auditing. I've been following the trail of the Seraphim-X since 2002. Riley narrowed her eyes. "And you just happened to show up tonight?" He nodded, slowly. "You reactivated a system that's been dormant for over 2 decades. That ping traveled. You're watching the console logs?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Let's just say certain systems still listen, even when no one's supposed to be listening." Glenn didn't lower the crowbar. "I'm not here to take it," Marcus said. "I'm not here to arrest anyone. I just want to understand." "Why you?" Riley didn't answer at first. Then, finally, "Because my dad stole it, and because he left it for me." The man's expression changed. He stepped forward slightly, lowering his voice. "Your father was the last pilot of this program, and the most gifted. They said he could talk to the machine without touching it." "He could," Glenn muttered. "I believe you," Marcus said. Then he paused. "But I also believe that now that it's awake, others will come looking." Riley stepped out of the stairwell fully. "So what do you want from me?" Marcus looked her dead in the eye. "I want to help you finish what he started, because I don't think this was meant to fly away." He nodded toward the pod, glowing softly behind her. "I think it was meant to fly home." "What foreman?" Riley didn't answer Marcus right away. She stared at him, her jaw tense, the weight of his words still rippling in the air. Behind her, the Seraphim-X pod glowed faintly, like a heartbeat pulsing under the skin of the world. Glenn hadn't moved, still gripping the crowbar, not out of fear, but out of habit. Trust didn't come easy to men who'd seen governments lie. "Talk," Riley finally said. "Everything you know, from the beginning." Marcus stepped into the main chamber like someone returning to a church he hadn't been to since childhood. He moved slowly, scanning every inch of the room, the console, the wall etchings, even the dust. "You know about the ARC project, I assume," he said, voice calm. Mid-82nds, post-Reagan, pre-collapse paranoia. We had shelters, but no delivery system. No guarantee we could move people fast enough when everything came apart. So they built this. He gestured to the pod. Seraphim wasn't just an evac unit. It was the evac unit. Vertical launch, geo-orbital glide, retro rockets. A one-person exodus. Riley crossed her arms. "Why just one?" He looked at her. "Because that's all they thought they could save." She blinked. "What?" Marcus stepped closer to the pod. It wasn't about families or ethics. It was about assets, a single mind, a president, a scientist, a clean slate to reboot a broken system. Glenn scoffed. "That's not a lifeboat. That's a bullet." Marcus didn't argue. It was never meant to be humane. It was meant to be effective. And your father? He was the only one who could fly it without dying from neural feedback. He didn't just pilot it, he bonded with it. Riley's voice was low. And they still shut it down, Marcus nodded. Too expensive, too many ethical concerns, too much heat from Congress. So they buried it. But not before someone your father disappeared with the final prototype. And no one came after him? They tried, Marcus said, but he vanished. Records deleted, moved across states, changed registration numbers on vehicles. He was a ghost with a wrench. And then he died before they could catch up. Riley swallowed hard. So why are you here now? Marcus looked at her, dead serious. Because now that it's active again, someone else will come. The wrong people. Glenn finally lowered the crowbar. Just slightly. Echo Ridge, Marcus continued, was one of 7. But this one was different. Your father had this one built out. He embedded redundancies, modified access levels, made it more than they asked for. He pointed to the back wall. That panel, he said, isn't just for diagnostics. It's for launch sequencing. The Seraphim can still fly. It can reach suborbital altitude and link with decommissioned satellites. Which means, if it gets into the wrong hands, Riley finished. Someone could use it to escape, or disappear. Marcus nodded slowly. And with that power comes leverage, blackmail, deterrence, a second life or a last resort. Riley looked at the pod. It no longer looked like a project. It looked like a choice. So, Marcus said, his voice softer now, what are you going to do with it? She didn't answer. Not yet. But something deep in her heart beneath the grease, the grief, the quiet shame of being a mechanic in a world that prized shiny things began to turn like a gear long rusted shut. She wasn't just here to protect what her father left behind. She was here to finish what he wasn't allowed to. Riley didn't sleep that night. None of them did. They stayed underground, in Echo Ridge, the pod humming softly like it was dreaming. Glenn made coffee on a propane burner they found in a rusted emergency kit, and Marcus combed through every line of her father's journal, like a man decoding scripture. Riley sat by the console, watching the system run its endless diagnostics, her mind running a parallel loop of its own. She kept coming back to one question. What was this thing really for? At 3:12 Marcus said quietly. I found it. They both turned. He'd opened a thick, water-warped folder labeled simply MK Eco, Continuity Unit C7. Inside were diagrams, not just of the Seraphim pod, but of entire launch platforms, hidden rail systems, decommissioned bunkers, data uplinks disguised as weather towers. Glenn whistled low. They built a network, Marcus nodded. 7 known units, each with a designated Seraphim-class evac pod. But your father's Pod X-class was the only one fitted with an override relay and AI co-navigation. It was the final evolution. The Ark Queen, they called it in the field reports. He laid out a sketch, rough, hand-labeled in pencil. It showed the pod in flight, linking to an orbital platform codenamed Nest 1. Riley leaned in. This thing was meant to go to space? Not space, Marcus said. Stratospheric altitude, high enough to avoid detection, low enough to glide back with precision. And Nest 1? A tethered relay point. Experimental. Only one was ever built. It never launched officially. Riley stared at the lines, the annotations, the raw ambition of it all. She could see her father's handwriting in the margins of one page. Little arrows, suggestions, warnings. One line caught her eye. Unit X must not be treated as an escape, but as a signal, a message to whatever comes next. She closed her eyes. He hadn't just hidden the pod, he'd preserved it. For someone like her. For her. What does this do now? She asked, tapping the console. Is this just a dead relic, or... Marcus pointed to the folder again. There's one more schematic, a modified relay node installed into Seraphim-X. It's coded to activate only after a successful relaunch. Once triggered, it sends a burst transmission on all legacy defense channels. Not a message. A reset code. Glenn's eyes narrowed. A reset of what? Marcus swallowed. We don't know. It was black layer classified even for internal security, but the name of the code stuck. He flipped the page, written in all caps. Project. Requiem. Riley stood slowly. The walls of the bunker felt smaller now. Not because they were closing in, but because the scope of what her father had done was opening out. This wasn't just a machine. It was an instrument, a key left in her hands, decades too late, and just in time. She turned toward the pod. If we restore it, she said, we finish his mission. Marcus nodded. But once you light this thing up, he added, you don't put it back to sleep. Riley stepped forward, resting her hand on the cold metal of the hatch. Then we'd better make sure we do it right. Well, if you wad of mind, by dawn, the bunker was a workshop. A sacred one. Riley moved like a woman possessed, her jumpsuit smeared with grease, fingers blackened with old lubricant and dust. Every inch of the Seraphim-X was being re-examined. Glenn rerouted cables and restored power nodes using scraps from long-abandoned cabinets. Marcus deciphered defense code logs on the flickering monitors, and the pod, her pod, now seemed to respond to their energy. It felt less like a machine, more like a presence, a co-pilot waiting to finish the journey it was built for. They were halfway through disassembling a corroded pressure regulator when Marcus set down a thick binder with a dull thud. I found the real reason this thing was built, he said. Riley didn't look up at first. Just kept working. You already told us, she muttered. Escape pod for someone important. No, Marcus said. Not someone. One person. And not just to escape. To lead. That made her stop. He opened the binder. Inside were transcripts. Memos stamped TOP secret. One document stood out, a 1991 directive from the executive office. In the event of total systemic collapse, the commander-in-chief will be relocated via Seraphim-class aerial vehicle to a secure off-grid location. Under no circumstances shall evac protocol exceed 1 passenger. Command continuity is primary. All other considerations secondary. Glenn read it over Riley's shoulder. They really planned to leave everyone else behind. They had to, Marcus said. Too many variables. Too much chaos. One leader survives, that was the bet. And Seraphim-X? Riley asked. He nodded. The only one built with presidential biometric compatibility. Your dad designed the override failsafe. If the president didn't make it, he could fly it instead. A backup, with no one to back up. She stared at the binder. They gave my father the power to become a shadow president. No, Marcus said. They gave him a choice. And he walked away from it. Riley sat on the edge of the pod cradle, staring into the middle distance. He didn't steal this for himself. He preserved it, like a time capsule. A warning in case we forgot what desperation looks like. She reached inside the pod and powered up the main screen. It flickered to life, scrolling through system checks. Something new appeared. A countdown timer not active, but coded. Reinitiate evac protocol? Yes. Divided by no. Beneath it, the date it was last active. The 13th of October, 2001. Glenn's breath caught. That's a month after 9/11, Marcus nodded. They tried to reactivate Seraphim-X, but it had already disappeared. Your father must have known they'd come looking. Riley stared at the screen, her reflection swimming faintly in the blue glow. She wasn't just restoring something. She was reviving it. A machine built for power, stolen for conscience, and hidden for someone who might still believe in people instead of protocol. This was never about saving a president, she said quietly. It was about saving a chance. The three of them stood there, the mechanic, the soldier, and the analyst in a forgotten bunker beneath a forgotten hill, staring at a pod that had outlived a country's fear. And Riley knew, deep in her gut, that the next choice was hers. Would she bury it again? Or bring it back to life? The deeper Riley dug into the files, the more it became clear. This project hadn't been shut down because it failed. It had been buried because it worked too well. And because someone tried to stop it from ever flying again. The first signs were small, logs out of sequence, diagnostics rerouted mid-cycle, test flight files labeled redacted, with timestamps ending in abrupt static. Glenn leaned over her shoulder as she traced the gaps, his brow furrowed. "That's not a glitch," he said. "That's a deliberate wipe. Someone inside the system didn't want this thing to launch," Riley muttered. Marcus flipped through the journal again. Faster now. There was a launch scheduled. Test Site Delta, July 5th, 1999. But the records skip from the prep stage straight to the cancellation. No reason given. Just blank. He held up a sheet. All remaining assets classified. Project disbanded. No further communication authorized. Riley sat back in the pilot's seat of the pod, still docked to the cradle. Her father's handwriting echoed in her mind. The closer we got to success, the more they pulled away. Like they were afraid of what this meant. Not escape. Exposure. She closed her eyes and listened to the silence of the bunker. But this time, it wasn't quiet. It was charged. The walls hummed with history, with the weight of decisions made in boardrooms too far from consequence. Glenn leaned against the wall. "I remember the rumors. One of the prototypes exploded during a closed-door test. No casualties, just a crater and a bunch of shredded contracts. They blamed a fuel system's failure, but everyone knew it was sabotage. Why?" Riley asked. "Why destroy something that could save lives?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Because power is never about saving lives," he said finally. "It's about controlling the narrative. And this?" He gestured to the pod. "This thing wasn't controllable. If the right person launched it with the wrong message, they could tell the world everything the government worked to hide." Riley looked down at her hands. Calloused, dirty, strong. Her whole life, she'd been the fixer. The one called in when things broke. She never asked for this. But maybe, just maybe, the pod had waited for someone like her, someone who didn't want to use it for power, but for truth. Marcus paced. "If you activate it, there's no taking it back. They'll come. The kind of people who don't knock," Glenn added. "And once that reset code transmits, every eye that's been sleeping will wake up." Riley nodded, but she didn't flinch. She turned toward the console and opened a hidden panel beneath the seat, something her father mentioned once, in a throwaway line in the journal. Inside, a fail-safe ignition key, separate from the digital systems. Analog, mechanical, a final override. She held it up, and then whispered, "Then let them wake up, because what they'd buried wasn't a threat. It was a truth bomb, and she was done, playing small." The next morning, the bunker transformed into something holy. Riley laid out the tools like instruments in an operating room. Glenn prepped the wiring harnesses. Marcus sat with a thick binder of schematics, cross-checking every circuit, every seal, every algorithm buried in the code. The Seraphim-X pod, once dormant, now gleamed in the pale bunker light like a relic brought back from myth. She started with the fuselage. Panels needed reinforcement. The outer shell had taken on corrosion from years of dormancy, but it held. Underneath, the internal wiring remained pristine, insulated, preserved by her father's obsessive maintenance. She cleaned the O2 filters herself, hands trembling only slightly. Every bolt she turned felt like a note in a symphony composed decades before she was ready to hear it. Hours passed. Time warped. It wasn't just a rebuild, it was a resurrection. Riley wiped sweat from her brow, grease streaking across her temple. "Who restores a classified escape pod in a forgotten Cold War bunker?" she joked weakly. "You do," Glenn said without looking up. "Apparently." She smirked, but her hands didn't stop moving. One by one, they installed the components. The neural interface, the life support array, the burn control system that regulated the pod's vertical thrust sequence. And finally, the module labeled Legacy Sync, her father's final edition, a bridge between past and future. They bolted it in together. When they flipped the main breaker, the entire room seemed to exhale. A low electric hum filled the air, and the pod's surface shimmered faintly with heat as the systems surged to life. The console lit up. Status, flight ready. Riley stepped back. For a long moment, no one said anything. And then came the knock at the door, But this time it wasn't a threat. It was help. Pete, from her old neighborhood, brought a box of aircraft-grade tools after Glenn quietly made a call. Behind him, Dr. Lila Henderson, a propulsion engineer turned high school physics teacher, still wearing her school lanyard. Then came Leo, the kid she once let shadow her in the shop when no one else would. A retired machinist, a journalist, a diesel mechanic. Word had spread quietly, carefully, and now they were showing up, not for glory, for legacy. The way Riley worked, it caught on. Every person who walked into that bunker saw the pod and understood without words. This wasn't a military project. It wasn't a conspiracy. It was unfinished business. Glenn wiped his hands and grinned. "Looks like you've got yourself a crew." Riley stood beside the pod, stunned. "I didn't ask for one." "No," Marcus said. "But the right mission brings the right people. They didn't need permission. They had purpose. Together, they welded, cleaned, aligned guidance thrusters, rewired long-dead junctions, polished the exterior, calibrated the AI response system using backups from her father's own flight logs. Logs Riley had memorized like bedtime stories she never got to hear as a kid. Each day brought them closer. And each night, Riley would sit alone in the cockpit, fingers resting on the console, hearing his voice again. "Don't restore it to factory. Make it yours." She wasn't just rebuilding a pod. She was rebuilding a message one the world never got to hear. And when it was ready, it would speak louder than any warhead ever could. It started with a single photo. Leo, wide-eyed and proud, had snapped a picture of Riley standing beside the newly restored pod grease on her cheek, jumpsuit half-zipped, fluorescent lights glinting off the Seraphim's curved shell. He posted it to a tiny online forum for vintage aerospace enthusiasts, captioned simply, "You won't believe what we're restoring in a Cold War bunker." He meant no harm, but within hours, it was everywhere. First, it got shared to a small Reddit community, then picked up by an aviation blogger, then syndicated across Twitter, Facebook, and eventually CNN. Riley's name wasn't attached, but the image was unmistakable. A gleaming, classified escape pod, a woman in boots and oil-stained sleeves, a story hiding in plain sight. By the next morning, a local news van rolled up near Echo Ridge, then two more, and then national outlets. Riley stood at the edge of the tree line, arms crossed, watching a growing crowd of journalists squinting through binoculars and trying to decipher what, exactly, was going on beneath their feet. Glenn stood beside her. "We knew this day would come," she nodded. "I just didn't think it'd be from a kid with a smartphone." Down in the bunker, Marcus was already fielding calls. Former colleagues, defense contacts, names he hadn't heard in 20 years, suddenly popping up with questions disguised as small talk. But they were too late. The pod was ready, and so was Riley. That afternoon, a reporter from American Engineering Monthly reached out with a formal request, a feature story, not a leak, a legacy piece. The subject line read, "The Mechanic Who Found America's Ark." Riley stared at it, stunned. Marcus smiled when he saw her reaction. "That's what they're calling it now. Seraphim-X, the Ark. Poetic, isn't it?" But Riley didn't care about names or headlines. She cared about truth, and the truth was this. People were beginning to understand. The pod wasn't a weapon. It was a message, not just from her father, but from a generation that lived in fear and built things to survive it. Things that were never supposed to fall into the hands of those who only saw value in silence. They began planning the public demonstration, a short ignition. No launch, just proof. Proof it worked. Proof it lived. The night before the demo, Riley sat alone in the cockpit, hands resting on the controls. The key sat in her lap, cool and smooth. The same one her father had left behind, hidden in a foam pouch beneath the second crate. Glenn appeared at the hatch. "They're setting up lights, cameras, the works." She nodded, but didn't move. "You sure about this?" he asked. "No," she said. "But if we don't show the world what this was really for, someone else will twist it." He stepped closer. "This doesn't end with a photo, Riley. I know. It starts with a flame." She met his eyes. And for the first time since they opened that locker, she smiled. Then let's light it. The day of the test was crystal clear. No wind, no clouds, just the kind of blue sky that begged for something to break through it. They'd cleared the area. Press passes were issued. Engineers and old veterans stood shoulder to shoulder with YouTubers and high school science teachers. Everyone was waiting for one thing: proof, not of conspiracy or power, but possibility. Down in the bunker, Riley adjusted the final harness. The pod was wired to external sensors, its AI synced with the restored mission interface. It wasn't a full launch, just a systems ignition. Enough to show what Seraphim-X was capable of. Enough to show the world it was real. She sat in the cockpit, sealed inside the machine her father left behind. The lights pulsed in rhythm. The walls vibrated like lungs filling for the first time in years. She placed her hand on the biometric pad. It scanned her in less than a second. Monroe, our legacy pilot. Mission. Echo confirmed. The console lit up. Outside, a countdown clock was projected on a temporary screen. T-minus 60 seconds. Glenn's voice came over the comm line. You're good down here. Pressurization stable. Thruster feedback at 0. Copy, Riley said. Her voice didn't shake. Marcus added, if you want to pull out, now's the time. But if you fire it, I'm not pulling out, she said, because this wasn't about test flights. It was about truth. She looked down at the ignition key in her hand. That smooth chrome surface that had traveled through time, silence, fear, and landed in her lap like a torch. She slid it into the final slot and turned. The pod came alive. Vents opened. Fuel lines primed. The main thruster roared softly, then louder, then stabilized. The entire cradle rattled as the pod locked into place, alive with more energy than anything she'd ever worked on. Outside, the crowd gasped. Cameras zoomed in, and then the exterior lights flared. A white-blue glow shimmered beneath the pod just enough to show what was coming. Not today. Not yet. But soon. Then, Riley killed the engines. Silence fell, but it wasn't empty. It was electric. She opened the hatch and stepped out. Dirt on her boots, sweat on her back, grease on her knuckles. The crowd stood there still, stunned as the camera shutters clicked like static rain. Then one person clapped. Then another. Then the whole crowd erupted, not in celebration of a machine, but in reverence for what it meant. That someone, somewhere, had left behind a future worth fighting for. And someone else, someone ordinary, someone overlooked, had chosen to finish it. That night, back in the bunker, Riley sat alone beside the pod. Glenn had gone home. Marcus was talking with journalists upstairs. The crew had left sandwiches and sodas and offers to come back for Phase 2. But she needed quiet. She opened her father's journal one last time. There was a final page she hadn't read before, tucked into the back cover. If you find this, it means I was right to trust you. The pod wasn't built to save a president. It was built to save a purpose. Carry it forward. Not because you must, but because you can. Dad, Riley rested her hand on the hull. Still warm, then she whispered, I'm not going anywhere. Because the Seraphim wasn't just a pod. It was a message. A story buried in rust and fear, rebuilt in light and steel. And the girl they never saw coming? She was flying it forward.